After 3 years of work, finally we sort of ended up concluding that that's really hard to do what we're trying to build. We were trying to build a fairly complex engine. So we tried our hand at a bunch of other things, including a construction equipment and something on the testing side. Nothing was big enough for us to actually take a leap and start upon and spend the next 20 years of a life building. So we graduated out, took up jobs in different automotive firms, and figured that at some point in the next year or two, we'll figure out what to start upon. Now, just when we were graduating, me and another friend of mine, we were working on an idea of swappable battery packs for electric scooters. It's just a coincidence. This just came about as a part of a project that we were doing in our final year in a course. It was just an interesting concept at that point, right? If you can have swappable battery packs for electric scooters, that seemed to, at least on theory, solve all problems. Okay, certainly you can solve the problem of range, you can solve the problem of initial cost, you can solve the problem of, charging time, you can solve a whole bunch of problems. So like on paper, it seemed like a miraculous solution. And we went ahead and filed a patent. And since this was one of the last things that we filed while we were graduating out, we became pretty excited by this idea. So we started going deep into understanding the electric vehicle industry. We went out, started meeting people who had bought electric scooters, who had bought the only electric car in the country, Reva, at that point. We met a whole bunch of dealers, existing dealers, ex-dealers of electric vehicles. We also met a few of the companies who were selling these vehicles. So we met a fairly large crowd. Over 6 months of research, what started coming out was, two things came out in a big way. One was that everybody who had bought an electric scooter loved the concept of an electric scooter. They were very sold on the idea. They were very convinced that this was the future, right? Like this is what makes sense, and that's why they had bought it. They had bought into the story. The second big, very, very recurring trend was everybody who had bought an electric vehicle hated electric vehicles that were being sold in the market. None of them liked any single product out in the market, whether it be the cars or whether it be the scooters. They really could not, could not believe that this is what was being sold. So this was obviously very interesting. Not sure how many of you know what sort of electric vehicles were sold back in 2012, but this is what the bulk of the market looked like. I mean the scooters. Most electric scooters would have a top speed of about 25 km per hour. A very, very poor acceleration. Well, because, most of them would have about 250 watts of power, right? That's about 0.3-ish horsepower. So it's not really fast. Most of them the batteries were lead acid and would run out of juice in about 5,000 kilometers, which means practically every 8 to 12 months, you would have to replace your battery pack. And it was not a happy experience because it was not a step drop, right? So after the first 3 or 4 months itself, your range started dissipating every week. Like you could feel it dropping every week. It started with 50 kilometers. Month 4, it was giving like maybe 45. Month 6, it was giving 35. Month 10, it was giving 20 kilometers. It was a very depressing experience. And then finally, it would take about 6 to 8 hours to charge. The good thing was the vehicles were priced really low. So these vehicles would sell for about 30 to 35,000, right? So really cheap. Now, if you look at so we try to speak to people who are building these vehicles. We spoke to people who are selling these vehicles today, the existing dealers, and their rationale wasn't actually very wrong. Again, if you were to do a case study sitting in a room, it is not very wrong. Like their conclusion was that, hey, look at China. China is selling exactly this vehicle, and they're selling 30 million of them every year. That's twice the Indian overall two-wheeler market, right? Like they're massive, and they're growing like crazy. Everybody buys these vehicles in India. And think about it, also in China. And think about it, we're talking about building a vehicle which is cheaper to buy than an entry-level vehicle that you can buy, petrol vehicle that you can buy, and is 6 to 8 times cheaper to run. What's wrong with this pitch? Like, why will not everybody buy this? Like, everybody who cannot afford a petrol two-wheeler for purchase reasons or for running reasons should be running behind it, right? And their hope was that, it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of publicity. It's just a matter of government support. We are about to take off at any point of time. They had been selling this vehicle since 2007. 2009, the market did shoot up. They were selling 100,000 of them. 2012, I think they were selling 20,000 of them across the country. That's it. They were less than 0.1% of the overall two-wheeler market at that point. Now, if you have a look at the consumer side, so their definition of a consumer is very clear, right? Somebody who is coming from low-income segment wants a very, very cheap, maybe also safe vehicle, right? That's the view that many of these companies probably had. But if you looked at people who were buying these electric scooters at that point, they were people who probably had like a Honda parked in a garage. They were not looking for the cheapest two-wheel in the market. What they were early adopters. They were evangelists. What they were looking was for actually a pretty good story, right? And what they ended up buying was a pretty depressing experience. Think of trying to sell a vehicle like this, right? Your sales pitch really boils down to, especially with those customers, it really boils down to saying, hey, this vehicle, this will help you save the environment. It's a clean vehicle. And for that, please compromise on speed, quality, reliability, looks, comfort, ergonomics, everything. And you will look like a dot riding this vehicle, right? It's not a great sales pitch, right? It's a disaster sales pitch. And that's for the reason they were not selling a lot of them, right? It could probably sell a lot if already a bulk of the market had started buying this, and the lower income segments had enough trust going on for this, right? If electricity available was actually not a problem for that segment, and if they could believe that the infrastructure was there to charge these vehicles. But none of that was true at that point. So our point was that, okay, unlikely that we'll grow the way China grew. We are not going to basically mandate usage of electric vehicles in a big way. We are not going to ban petrol scooters tomorrow. We will probably grow the way US did. And if you look at US, clearly the only thing that was working was a pretty cool vehicle, right? Tesla. Like anything else wasn't really taking off. So we said, okay, what if we built a good story? So we left our jobs in early 2013, left our jobs, came back to IIT Madras, told the professors that, hey, we are decent engineers. We're pretty kicked about building an electric vehicle. We are not saying this is a company. We are not saying this is great dreams. All we're saying is we want to build an electric vehicle. You want to build a good electric vehicle. Can you support us? The professor at that point was a super big supporter of what we wanted to do. He got us some teaching assistantship work, gave us space, gave us labs. The departments were opened up to us completely. So for the first 6-8 months, we left our jobs, and all we were doing was trying to figure out what it means to build or put together a complete vehicle. We started with the battery, and then we started talking about the entire vehicle. 6-8 months later, we were ready to incorporate the company. So at that point, this is what we did. We went back to the same people from whom we had got these specs, and we told them, hey, what if we built a vehicle that would do 3x higher top speed, would have 20 times more power, that would basically have a 10 times longer battery, that would have 8 times faster charging, right? It would be lighter than your petrol scooters. It would have more storage space than your petrol scooters. And the only thing that we invested in by that point, apart from a little bit of prototyping, was in coming up with a render of how the vehicle should look like. The idea was the vehicle should look better than your typical Honda Activa or a TVS Vego or a Hero Pleasure looks like, right? We showed them a render of the vehicle. So then all these specs, better than your petrol scooters, will accelerate faster than your Activa, and will be 100% electric, right? Does that vehicle make sense? Those guys said, yes, obviously it makes sense. That's what we would have bought had it been available in the market. Very interesting. So we said, apart from that, your typical petrol scooter will cost you about 65K on road. What if we charge you a premium of maybe 30 to 40% on top of that, right? 20 to 30,000 extra on top of that. Again, the same response came. Obviously, we would still buy it. Like, we are giving us a better vehicle, cheaper to run, looks better, goes faster, is safer. Why not spend a little bit extra to buy that vehicle? Very interesting. So we incorporated the company, again went back to these guys, told them that, guys, we now actually putting a few years of our life on this. We're very serious about this. What do you guys think? If you're so serious that, you will actually buy this vehicle, why don't you actually pay us some money upfront? Interestingly, the first 5 people that we spoke to actually paid us 85,000 rupees upfront there and then. Right? So that, shouldn't call it seed money because we did not really use it, but that became the genesis for the company. Another 20 people offered another 10,000 rupees or so upfront. This was very important for us because what this taught us was that there was a market for this product. As product designers, we were not designing in a Latuna. There were actual folks who would pay good money for this. So this in some ways became the genesis for the company. And that's how we got started. Now, from there on, so this is about October 2013. We got started then. Used the first 1 year, we raised a tiny amount of funding. We raised about 40 lakhs totally with an angel investor, a little bit of a soft loan and all that. Hired 12 people, started building a whole bunch of things. So everybody was basically a complete team of their own. Okay, important point to probably talk about. So a big part of our thesis was that you've got to build a pretty powerful vehicle. This vehicle's got to be pretty cool. And the only way you can actually build a vehicle like this is to be vertically integrated. Now, we could have gone two ways at this point. We could have said, okay, you've got to build this. So, let's start finding out where will we find our batteries from, where will we find our BMS, battery material system from, our charger from, our dashboard from, our vehicle platform from, our suspension from, our data acquisition system from, where we who will do our software, who will do our distribution, all of that, right? That's a classic OEM approach. That's a classical automotive OEM approach. You only do vehicle engineering. You just get everything together and do the task of integration. Our thesis was that that's the second thing that's wrong with the industry, and probably at a global level. See, whenever a new industry pops up, it's never horizontally integrated. It's always very vertically integrated. I'm sure you guys might have been taught that in some course by now, I'm hoping. So why is it vertically integrated? Because you usually will not have good vendors for anything. Right? Look at the original computer industry before, Apple and Microsoft popped up. With the IBMs and those guys, it was very vertically integrated. Like the same guy who was making the computer, made the chips, made the microprocessors, put the entire system together, made the word processor for it, did the sales, like he owned the entire chain, right? Why? Because he really wanted to? Probably not. But because there was no good Intel, there was no good Microsoft, there was no good Dell out there at that point. So at the start of a new industry, things are always vertically integrated. And the EV industry, in our view, wasn't going to buck this trend in a big way. And this was important because everybody, like automotive industry is almost like the mother of all industries, which means players who exist here are not new upcoming upstarts. They are very, very, very established, entrenched players, right? This means 99.999% of the market is with people who are already in the old world, which is very horizontally integrated. So the only way those guys would look at a problem, so if a GM had to build this product, not this product, if a GM has to look at building an electric vehicle, its first instinct is to say, hey, find me a battery guy, get me a relationship with Panasonic, get me a relationship with Bosch for the motor, get Continental to do this. I need NVIDIA to give me the entire electronics, right? Get me all of this, and then we'll talk about a complete product. You get all these really expensive vendors stacked up. They've got really, really mediocre solutions because none of them have any experience in selling any of their wares with an actual OEM till date, right? It's a completely new industry. That's not true, by the way, when you do a petrol vehicle. Let's say if you were to build a petrol car or petrol scooter today, it would be pretty stupid for you to say, hey, I'm going to build my own fuel injection system, right? Because I want to be vertically integrated. Makes no sense. You go to a Bosch will probably have, they will have a fuel injector for you for your application, for your market, with your target usage, with your exact category of the vehicle, right? That's not true when you buy a battery pack rail. So which means when a GM would stack up all these vendors, they would have all these guys who have no experience. And because they're doing the R&D for the first time, they would have massive overheads attached to it. They would do the entire math and end up concluding, you know what? We are looking at an industry where the battery prices are about $600 to $700 per kilowatt hour. So, conclusion, electric vehicles don't make sense, right? Everybody was concluding the same thing, except folks like Tesla, and except very early stage startups like us, who looked at the math and said, what are you guys saying? Like, you can build this for like $300, and with a trend line which is going to $150 like in the next few years itself. Why are you guys still talking about $600? Why are you talking about motors which will cost you 30, 40, 50K for a two-wheeler? That makes no sense. It should probably be 5x lower. It is available. You probably, the technology is all there. If you think from, really the fundamentals of what goes in, it's not that expensive. So anyways, how this put together meant, we ended up concluding that vendors are a pretty bad idea to work with at this point of the industry. The only way to pull this off is to be vertically integrated. So we ended up saying, let's bring all the technology in-house, making this a much longer effort, increasing our gestation period to get the first product out, but then giving us a lot more control. So we kept bringing pieces in and hired the first 12 people, ran for it for a year, built the first prototype. Along the way, on the last story, we realized that more than for the customer, as far as the customer is concerned, more than this story, what's actually more exciting is the fact that the vehicle can be intelligent. And electric vehicles lent themselves very well to being an intelligent vehicle. I can maybe talk more about it, but you guys should probably tell me if that makes sense for this class, right? So anyways, ended up concluding that and starting working on dashboards and a whole lot of software. Built the first prototype, and by about October 2014, we're ready to raise our next round of funding. This came from Sachin and Mini Bansal of Flipkart, who made a fairly big bet on our approach and the technology, and invested $1 million in. Then in about March 2015, we raised a Series A. This was from Tiger Global for about $12 million, which became the first real big money that came into the system and allowed us to now actually talk about taking something to production, actually talk about setting up our distribution, setting up marketing, all of that. And a few months back, we closed a Series B with Hero MotoCorp for $30 million, which now hopefully will actually get us to production sometime in early 2018. And
hey, Tarun. So my question is about the fact that you mentioned that electric vehicles and electric scooter can be smart.
Yes.
So how did you get that insight, and when did you get that insight? Because it's a very important insight to actually get into this industry right now. If you have simply an electric engine and you just sell it as an electric scooter, that makes a little bit lesser sense than you are selling a smart electric vehicle.
Right.
So how did you get that?
Right, like I should have probably actually talked more about it. So I don't think we had a very clear reasoning set when we went down this path, but now I can probably crystallize those thoughts better. So typically, and especially in the industry that we are getting into, this is like, let's say when Facebook started, the entire social media business was actually pretty small, wasn't super entrenched, in the sense that it is not like something which was already defined for the last 50 years with massive incumbents worth hundreds of billions dollars of sales. That's not true in our case. So it's very important to, as a new company, to remember that you actually have certain limitations, right? So it would be, for example, a little too ambitious for us to say that we can, I'll get to your question, and let me just take a slight detour to get there. It would be a little too ambitious for us to say that, hey, we will have a better quality than a Honda, the day we start our first production. Or we'll have a better distribution or a better cost structure than a Hero with our first product line. Or we'll have a better product portfolio than some other established company that had been there for 50 years. What I'm trying to say is, our thought here was that you don't want to compete on parameters that existing incumbents are already very good at, right? Or that existing incumbents are already competing on. Which means if you can just pick up a brochure of your existing competition, right? Everything that they're talking about there, you should probably blank out all of that. And at least this was our thought. And not ideally talk about any of that. So what would a bike or a scooter company talk about? They would talk about, and I know I'm going again for a written here, but just bear with me. They would talk about speed. They would talk, if it's a bike. They would talk about performance if it's a bike. If it's a scooter, they would talk about comfort. They would talk about storage capacity. They would probably talk about mileage, right? They would talk about financing options. They would talk about number of maintenance, number of touch points that they exist in the country, 5,000 touch points, right? You're totally covered. Our conclusion was, and this is a little later after we got started, and you guys have spent more and more time thinking about this, we shouldn't make any of that. Well, we have to talk about all of that, but that none of those points can be our first USP. This means we need a completely fresh USP. We need something that these guys are not talking about in their brochures, right? We need something that hence these guys are not going to be very good at fundamentally, right? Can they catch up on that parameter? Yes. Like if they have money, eventually they will probably try and catch up. But today they're not already very good at it, which means suddenly you level the playing field. Right? You are not now playing a catch-up game. You started with it, and then now they have to catch up with you. And that's like your tiny foot in the door to actually be ahead of massive incumbents. So it then basically ended up meaning we realized that, hey, now the Indian companies seem to be talking about a smart vehicle. They don't seem to be taking intelligence or data collection or monitoring or remote diagnostics really serious, right? These are probably smart tick boxes that they have on the thing, like they just tick mark and move ahead, right? Digital dashboard. What that means is like nothing. It's still the same speed shown the same way. Like nothing changed there. Remote diagnostics is really not there. It's just something to say probably. If we make that a key part of a user experience and actually center the entire vehicle's story around that pitch, we are now no longer solely another scooter out there, right? Compared on the same parameter. we're now a smart scooter. That means we should be priced different. We should be looked at different. The way you will think about the reason you will own this, the target customers who will own it, will have not too much to compare this on. And that's where you want to be as a startup. So that's the reason why it actually became pretty easy for us to say that hence, hey, this has got to be smart vehicle. How electric lend itself well, you can do a lot of things, a lot of the stuff that we're doing today, even a petrol scooter, but just so much extra cost, right? If you want to add something which will control performance, it's in an electric vehicle, it's literally a little bit of software, right? Because a little bit of firmware, because all the hardware is usually in place to control the motor, control the controller, all of that. With an engine, it's not so easy. You'll have to add a whole bunch of complicated hardware on top of it, so it won't come naturally. So that's why it became really easy for us to do it, and that's the reason why we did it. Makes sense?
But I had a doubt over here. You said that you found out this USP of not getting into those features that other competitors are actually on the ground playing into, but rather something that is actually unique. But did you realize it after getting your funds? Because then it would make you were actually just trying things.
No, again, very good question. Sorry. So I'm not a big fan of pivots or of changing a business model on the go, right? I think lean startup is probably one of those terms which are interpreted a little wrongly to mean that, be very fluid with your business plan, keep changing your vision, keep changing your approach, keep pivoting all the time until you find something that sticks, right? It's a very, very slippery slope. So that's not what we are trying to do. What we were saying was, think of the approach and the vision in this way. We've got to build something which is very different and not a marginal improvement, right? And hence, these numbers made sense to us. 3x, 20x, 10x, 8x. Great. I think we're on the right path. Somewhere down the line, what we concluded was, while this is good, this is not good enough. That this is not a marginal improvement on those parameters, but wouldn't it be more interesting if we weren't competing on those parameters at all? That's a step above what we are saying, right? It's in the same direction, but now you're saying, hey, not only be an order of magnitude better, but be better on something that others are not even competing on. That's brilliant. Then you don't even need to say I'm 10x better. Hey, I have this. You don't do. You don't. It's pretty simple, easy pitch. So it was a little bit of a natural evolution. There were a few things initially in our business model that we changed significantly. For example, battery swap. I mentioned briefly about it. We don't do battery swaps today. That was a significant change, but that wasn't because our vision changed. That's basically where our approach changed towards achieving the same vision with electric vehicles. Hope that answered.
One question. So from the competition perspective, you talked about the USP which you have. But apart from that particular USP, do you have something else in mind as well, which sets you apart from the competition? My question is coming from, let's say, Mahindra, which already has Rewa. It's in car segment, but it bought a US-based electric scooter vehicle, which it plans to bring to India. So any sustainable advantage which you want to hold on to while dealing with the competition?
So if I get it right, you're really asking what is the long-term moat in the business. So long-term moat comes due to multiple reasons. In our case, we believe the approach that we have taken of vertical integration gives us a very interesting moat. Because now, even if somebody wants to say, well, let's copy this vehicle, let's recreate the entire experience, it won't be the same as, they can't recreate the exact same experience. They won't get the exact same performance in the same weight. They won't get the exact same range in the same cost. They won't get the exact same amount of software features with the same hardware because they're not going to build it on a similar platform. Their current approach forces them to basically build a platform on which they add modules, right? A battery module, a motor module, controller module, dashboard module. That inherently adds a fair degree of redundancy in the system. Now, can they chunk that module and go in the vertically integrated way and build a very integrated product? Yes, but then that gives you an automatic mode because then what they're saying is, let's build Ather from scratch again. So, whatever, it gives you a couple of years of moat around you. And another moat that comes, which is a little structural to how the industry is, once an industry gets started, it becomes increasingly harder for you to go the vertically integrated. So think of it today. Apple is a vertically integrated company. It's probably Apple and Tesla probably are the best examples that you can take in vertical integration. But then now the challenge is, if today a mobile phone manufacturer says, hey, let me also build a vertically integrated company and build a similar software and hardware integration like Apple, the challenge is there is already an Apple that you're competing with. You're basically now catching up. All you're saying is, I'll catch up on the Apple experience built over 20, whatever number of years, right? And build that better than Apple. Sure, be Apple's guest, but it's going to take you a fairly long time to get there. How will you survive in the interim? What is your USP? Your USP is not going to come from cost, because vertical integration in the initial few years is going to be pretty expensive. It's not going to come from the actual user experience, because Apple's going to deliver better user experience. You don't have the learnings, the DFME experience, the DFMA experience that the integration needs, that Apple already has. So your journey uphill is pretty hard. So the first movers, like this is one of the few times when the first mover advantage is very real in industry, if you're going the vertical integration. Right? What I've seen is very important is to have your own pieces before you start building anything. Okay. And that's why I said I'm not a big fan of, this approach where you say, so we actually have a wall in our office. So there's this Facebook saying, move fast and break things, right? Very famous now. I'm sure everybody would have heard of it. We have a wall in our office where we have literally broken down the word break things, right? You don't want to break things. You don't want to be as stupid as saying, let's just ship something, right? And then we'll figure out what sticks, right? No, what you want to do is have a very solid view of the future. Well, that's our approach again, right? This is something that we, both co-founders and our case, believe very strongly. Both of us believe very strongly. You want to have a very definitive view of the future. And then, once you have that view in mind, now you want to figure out how to get there. The approach can vary, right? Like you probably think straight line, you will probably go all over. But if you don't have a definitive view, all you know is, this seems interesting, right? Big data seems interesting, or chatbots seem interesting, or AI seems interesting. You don't know what you're building towards, right? You will start doing something. You'll do it for 3 months, and then you will reach a point and say, this doesn't make sense for India. Or, if you have to do this, you have to own the full technology stack. Or Facebook has like an immeasurable need here. Or 3 years later, this is going to be obsolete. Why am I doing this? Social media, Facebook, right? I genuinely believe that Facebook had a very definitive view of the world and not what they actually wrote on that wall, move fast and break things. That was only for the execution part. Which is that, hey, if we get social media right, in the future, 20 years later, people are going to be super connected. Their lives are going to be super digital. And they're going to, this is going to be an important and integral part of the entire, their life. Right? Now, that's a definitive view. That view is not concerning Facebook, right? So it does not depend on Facebook. It's almost saying 20 years later, that is going to be reality, come what may, right? Even if we died, somebody else is anyways going to crack it, right? So that's a definitive view that you have for the future. That would probably require you to do a lot of reading, talking to a whole bunch of people, do whatever research you can, but then reach a point where you can distill it down to a one-line thesis, right? That's the thesis that you're willing to bet your life on, right? It is guaranteed. It is guaranteed that everybody's going to buy online, right? That's such a rock-solid truth that you don't need to worry about your business plan's sustainability, right? It's guaranteed everybody's going to buy online tomorrow, right? It's probably 5 years, it's probably 10 years, heck, it might be 20 years, right? But that is a guaranteed thing. So if everybody is going to buy online tomorrow, and that's so certain, it certainly gives you a lot of clarity as a business. Now what you can say is, so if it's guaranteed that everybody's going to buy online, if I can build a business which gives you a lower price, it's a guaranteed business, right? Or if I can build a business around the logistics of e-commerce companies, right? It's guaranteed to work, right? I might take 3 years, I might take 8 years. But I have such a big view of the future that I can afford a few mistakes. What goes really wrong is when you say, food tech seems very interesting, right? Or let's say you start with that, and then you land up in a place where you end up concluding the economics don't work. Right? As opposed to starting a definite view of the world where you're saying, that everybody's going to order food online 10 years later, right? And then you figure out what is the part of that new economy that you really want to be a part of, right? That you really want to change. Rather than figure out, it's only the same analogy as saying, you've got a piece of technology and now you're trying to figure out what to build a product of, right? As opposed to saying, well, there is a definitive need, people will actually pay money for this. Now let me figure out what sort of product I can actually build, what sort of technology I need to develop for this. as a startup, there are usually two things which forces you to unveil it early. Now, most hardware startups unveil their products early. They go on Kickstarter, they go on a crowdsourcing campaign, purely because they need to show traction. If they don't have traction, then they won't be able to convince investors to put money into them, right? Or sometimes they don't even get investors. The crowdsourced funding is the only way for them to actually get started and build something. In our case, the reason we have been using since late 2014, and we unveiled in 2016. If I be honest, because we wanted to make sure that we survive. If we had $50 million in the bank, you would have heard of me or of Ather until probably middle or late this year, right? Because why would we care? Why would we care about making a splash and being out there, being visible if you have all the money? But you need money as a startup, especially in an ecosystem. For us to get that 1 million probably was a different story, but the 12 million after that and the 30 million after that, let's be real, it only comes in if investors actually get excited about what you're doing, right? And that often forces you to be out there a little early. Now, in our case, as I said on the mail, this was actually also a complicated case of us underestimating the time it would take to go through testing, right? So we had a functional prototype. We pretty kicked about it. We figured, hey, if you reach the stage to actually get to production, it's probably 12 months, right? It can't take much longer. We under-anticipated by at least 2x, right? And that's why now it's like another year on top of it. So that's clearly our fault. Had we known this, I think we'd have delayed a little bit more. We would probably have not unveiled it in the start of 2016. We would have waited a little bit more, even if we needed funding. Right? So that's one big part.
I have a question. As you are trying to do something which is pretty unique, as you said that you started from the scratch and everything, how did you went through that journey of identifying that what is the technology set and everything is the right thing to do, which you are very sure about? Because many times when you try to build something new, you try some technology sets and all, but at later stage of technology means it is a smart vehicle, right? There must be some technology which you should be using to get the feedback back and to be able to, right? You may not, there may be some innovation around that. So how that journey went where you were sure about, yes, this makes sense to put long-term effort and bet so much. And number two, subsequent to that question is that how did you then ramp up the team to where you are right now to be able to sell that vision and they working for you in a motivated way without seeing the first sale?
Yeah. I think both of those tasks are really the founding team's responsibility. Like those are probably the biggest jobs that you have as a co-founder. At least in our case, those are the biggest jobs that we had as co-founders. So yes, it's a very tricky thing when you're talking about vertical integration, when you're talking about taking really long-term bets on a technology approach, on a product approach, because what you're really betting there is that the specs that you're writing or the approach that you're talking of is the right thing to bet on, right? And you're also going and saying no pivoting, right? Like you can't be like waking up every day and saying, oh man, that's a fancier or better approach, right? You've got to have something that you can hold on to for like a solid 4-5 years without it being largely untrue. There is no, I can't think of a easy logical explanation of how do you crack that. I think that's one of the skills that you need to probably have in the starting founding team to get that right.
While I agree that you initially start with vertical integration, ultimately, if you are to grow beyond a certain size, you will have to outsource some of your manufacturing processes. So have you thought about it right now, or is it too early to focus on which products, which components you will be specializing in-house, and whether you will be empowering other vendors for the other components?
So I think it goes in multiple stages. You even today we don't talk about manufacturing anything in-house, right? So manufacturing, by the way, is like you have two sort of vendors and two approaches. One is where you say, this is the design, this is the drawing, this is the process layout, this is the process flow, this is exactly the tolerance that I want you to do, this is the machine that you will use, go produce it, okay? And then you have a vendor who would produce it with all of that, right? And then you have a supplier, right, who let's say suspension supplier or an engine supplier, right? Or a motor vendor. The motor vendor will do a lot of code development with you. So basically, you will tell them, I need these specs, and that company will develop that motor for you. which means now they own the design. Both guys are effectively suppliers/vendors, but a very different approach. So we are saying we are going with the first route more than we're going with the second route today. Now in stage one, we believe that is inevitable. You anyway spin manufacturing out. Like bringing manufacturing in is very, very, very painful, more than expensive. Next step, you start churning out a lot of grunt work out. It's a little hard to see on day one. Even we struggle with it. But you start realizing that in the vertical integrated approach that you've taken, your team is now doing a whole lot of grunt work, whether it be PCB layout, or it be testing, or it be a lot of CAD modeling, drawing work that you can start spinning out, right? Focus on the cream within the team. And then there will come one day, when you will start concluding that, hey, you can't own these pieces also in. So start spinning this complete module outside Ather, outside your company. There are a few exceptions to the last stage. So Apple, for example, has skipped it completely. It's probably the only true exception I can think of. Almost everybody else ends up being fairly horizontally integrated. And that's an interesting approach. You could take the Apple approach, but it needs a lot of guts to take that, because you now will talk about owning a lot of things for a very long time. So you've got a phenomenally great product differentiation for you to survive as a company. You can't be getting there and still talking about a fairly commodity component that you will sell with a 10% margin. So if you can stick with that, you could probably continue being the same company that you were at the start of the industry. That's just a view.
Is pertaining to the execution of what you had think of the manufacturing. So let's say procurement, or where to exactly get you done the manufacturing, or dealership. So how did you go about it? Finding relevant people to do particular job, or maybe hiring them from where, the entire value chain from execution point of view.
How do you find manufacturing vendors?
So let's say going back a few years, once you had this idea that you'll be doing, you thought from strategic point of view that you'll be doing vertical integration. So what were the next steps? You brought on people. From where did you hire? What were the skill sets you were looking at? Then getting the manufacturing.
So our view has been that at the start of that sort of development, you need a lot of very innovative folks, young guys in the team, people who love hands-on work, right? So what we ended up doing in the first year or two was hire a whole bunch of people with FSAE experience. So Formula SAE, that's a lot of engineering colleges today in India build a Formula SAE car, like those race cars, and compete on it. What we saw was that those teams typically end up having the highest affinity towards hands-on work, whether mechanical or electronics, and they are the ones who will quickly get to prototyping. Our view was that the most important thing for us at that stage of the venture is prototyping. The only thing that will survive, as I was talking about, right, is getting a prototype out, showcasing it, right? And I don't mean what we did last year. Even before that, I mean 2014, right? Showcasing something to a first angel investor for him to get excited and put money behind it. So not your experience in engineering processes, not your experience with systems, not your experience in design, not your experience with vendor management, manufacturing. The product can be so horrible that it will never be manufacturable, right? In fact, that's what happened to us. The first two platforms that we built were completely off. Like, they've got nothing. Practically, the work on this vehicle started by second half of 2014, right? So before that, we were just building something completely different. No relevance to the product. But that is okay, because what we built by that point ensured that we got enough money to get started and move on, right? Otherwise, if at that point we had said, hey, just getting those guys who would build something that'll actually go to production, we would have died much before, right? Now, once you get through that stage, and that's the flux, that's a painful period, when you start getting enough money, but you've still got enough company mindset, which is this, let's get shit done, that sort of attitude, right? So there's no patience for processes, there's no patience for planning, there's no patience for systems thinking, there's no patience for thinking through the specs. For example, the spec for a vehicle like this, the spec sheet is like maybe 5,000 line items long. It's not a trivial exercise. It takes months to finish that some exercise. But imagine this team, which basically, we have an interesting idea. We'll prototype it, and on Friday you got the prototype out and you're running with it and testing it. Suddenly being asked to, spend 4 months in thinking through the specs, right? Go back to the drawing board, just sit there in the room. It does not happen easily. most of the last year for us was really spent in building in this culture, because we've been very insistent that we are not building the company for the first product launch, for one product, right? It is very important that we lay down the pieces. We build an engine as a company which can churn out product after product after product. And the only way that will happen is to make our entire team ambidextrous. They've got to be able to shift from this innovative mindset, this very hands-on mindset, to a very, very, very process-oriented, rigorous sort of mindset, right? If they don't manage the shift very well, we will end up getting stuck in one of them. If you get stuck with the innovative mindset, you will basically never ship a product. You will be bought out for your IP and you close down as a company, right? If you get stuck in the second mindset after you launch your first product, you will stop innovating after that and you will become another OEM just like anybody else, right? And you will not grow much because you're not allowed to. So very important is to first getting the, like that's what work for is seemingly working for us. Getting these guys a lot of interest and love for hands-on, right? A lot of innovativeness, a lot of dynamicism, and then at the right time, gently nudging them and eventually pushing them with a fork into developing the rigor needed to finish new product development.
Being a startup company, what motivated them to join with you, and how you are able to retain them?
So, again, I'll just refer to the same point. It's very important to hence create prototypes at multiple points for the guys to keep enough momentum and, remain excited about what's happening. Very tactically, I think every company, at least in our position, should give out ESOPs. Definitely a lot of ESOPs to early employees, but reasonable ESOPs continually. Not, at least don't stop giving employees stock options so that people have a motivation and they have a buy-in to the company. Many companies, after a certain point, start selectively giving out ESOPs. It's probably worth thinking you should give out ESOPs to everybody, because it doesn't matter how smart they were. If they go through this stage of the company, they become super valuable. It's almost guaranteed, right? At least in our case, that's what we are seeing. Even if you have an okay-ish employee come in, once you go through an year or two with Ather, you become suddenly super valuable, because let's say you worked on any of those systems. In India, you will not find anybody who's got any experience of any of the system and has never gone through a full product. So you should give them enough stock options to suck up, almost, if I were to use a bad word, to make them feel logged into the success of the company, right? Create enough milestones, create enough prototypes for people to feel real about it. What we do quite a lot, probably we overdo it sometimes, is we keep reiterating the vision of the company practically every other week. Right? So how we are, where we are headed, why we're doing this, why it is very important for us to focus on process today, why that will make sense for you to stick on with us, what are the upcoming products that we'll do, and why we will be better placed to do it than some of our competition. Keep reiterating on it. If those guys that you got in came for the vision, a quick and easy way that we've seen to validate that is by seeing whether they come in for the money that you offer them or for the stock option that you offer them, right? Everybody uniformly who takes the stock option route, higher stock options, lower cash than the market rate, you're almost convinced, you can be almost certain that you will not have a problem of, oh man, I'm not sure why I'm in this company ever with that empathy.